There's a new product that has come out to help with generational differences, generational communications. It's called Slang-O-Matic. And what it does is it's one of those, remember those little dials where a different word, as you spin it, appears in the little slot? And so the question says, will this bring world peace or societal collapse? So here we go. It takes a word and then runs through the different generations. We're just looking at 4 generations. So when the boomer says, that sounds fishy to me, Gen X says, that's a bit sketchy. And then millennials say, that's just shady. And then finally, Gen Z says, sus. So just a little educational there. One of the things we're looking at is how do we find peace? And really, sometimes it can be a communications thing. It really is about relationships, isn't it? One of my favorite artists over the last 20 years is Alanis Morissette, and she has a song called Hand in My Pocket. It's a song that embraces life's contradictions and finding peace within that uncertainty. And so some of the lyrics are being broke but happy, sad but laughing, lost but hopeful. And of course, one of the refrains says, and what it all comes down to is that I haven't got it all figured out just yet. Because I've got one hand in my pocket, and the other one is giving a peace sign. Now you're going to have that song in your head the rest of the day. You're welcome, if you've heard it before. Good stuff. And that's kind of how we feel a lot. We kind of feel this sense of we want peace, yet we live in this time of constant war and constant conflict. So how do we work for peace in the midst of that? How do we grow in our peace? Throughout history, humanity has always wanted peace, but it's an uphill battle. In terms of history and looking at biblical history, there was a time and when the New Testament was written called Pax Romana, or Roman peace. Their idea of peace was through violent conquest. That's how they brought peace. And in fact, they bragged about it. They called this good news that they were bringing, that they were going to defeat their enemies, and that Caesar would spread the gospel of Rome to the conquered lands. This was the good news that they brought. And if you're not aware of this, they actually called the Caesar the Son of God, the Prince of Peace, and Lord. Does that sound familiar to you? Christianity, of course, totally flipped that on its head. And Jesus brought the way of peace, which is not as the world gives peace, but a way of not defeating enemies, but loving them. That message came over 2,000 years ago, and as you can tell, we are not quite there yet, are we? So I did a little bit of research, kind of depressing research, but we do got to lay out the facts, right? So one source mentions that over the last 3 centuries, there have been only 286 years of peace within that time frame in Europe alone. That's not a lot of time of peace. And then there was the 19th century talks about how much conflict there was and bloodshed, just again over in Europe, across over into what we know as Russia. Since World War II, there have been at least 17 wars or armed conflicts in Europe. And if we look at the continent of Africa, another place just chock full of conflict, you have the colonial era conflict. Then you have wars of independence amidst the tribes in Africa, and post-colonial wars, regional conflicts, and of course the Middle East, chock full of conflict. Now, it's not just about war though, right? We are in the midst of conflict in our own country right now. There is so much division. So much division. Desmond Tutu, speaking about Africa, really speaks for all of us. He says, there is no peace because there is no justice. There can be no real peace and security unless there is first injustice or justice enjoyed by all. Justice for all. So that's what we're talking about today. And so let's hear that verse again from Isaiah. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and a little child shall lead them. One author says it's almost utopian thinking, right? I think I just saw a pretty scary article about someone who crawled down into a zoo area and was mauled by a lion. This idea, it almost sounds like, really? Are we going to have these animals getting along, and are we ever going to get along? But what this author then says is we need to have a vision. What do we know, or how do we know what to work for if we don't have a vision? And so Isaiah lays it out. This is what is to come. This is what we're going for. This is what God has wanted for humanity since the beginning. And as we talk about the coming of Christ, Christmas time, this is the reason Jesus came, to begin this time of peace through his work, through following his way. It starts with that love. It starts with God's love for us, our response to that, and then our love for each other. Now, again, if you turn on the news right now, in this culture, we are living in a us versus them time period. In therapy speak, this is a time of defensiveness. Defending your part. We have always two sides, with criticism, contempt, and stonewalling for each other. There's a need for peacemakers. And you remember Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." In Ukraine, families are torn apart as missiles rain down on cities and millions are displaced. In Palestine, still enduring endless cycles of violence and discrimination, unimaginable devastation. In Sudan, on my way over on the NPR today, I listened to the ethnic and political strife that continues there in those communities. And they've got nowhere to go, these refugees, as they try to run from these countries. In the face of this brokenness, Christmas isn't like a magical pill that comes to solve it, is it? Christmas comes to us, or as we call it, Advent, as we're waiting for this Messiah to be born and for us to be born again inside of us this time of year. As we close out the year, how do we become peacemakers in the midst of all this? Rob Bell, who you often hear me quote, says the following: peacemakers, first of all, he says, we can only bring peace to those who also desire peace, right? You can't force peace upon people and really have peace. And then he says this: a real peacemaker is someone who actually doesn't pick a side. They don't choose a side. Amazingly, they're able to see the weaknesses and strengths of both sides. They're not drawn into we're right and they're wrong. A real peacemaker is able to be loving of both sides, to help them find a middle way. Insights into this passage then, where is this coming from? Because it sounds almost foreign to us, this talking about these animals all getting along in some kind of utopian dream, if you will. Well, this Isaiah text, coming from this Near Eastern background, it came from a time period where kings were established by conquering not just lands, but even animals. If you look at the story of David, he was known not just as a shepherd, but as one who could defeat the lions and the wolves and those who were coming after the sheep. He established himself as a king by his conquering of these deadly animals. And so when it says in this Bible passage that one day they will all get along and we won't have this violence, there's some kind of transformation that must happen then. Going away from kings who only have victory by conquering and only bring peace by defeating is not the way the world is going to change. I get a lot of different emails, and one that came this week, which I'm really happy to share. I'm going to share a couple of real-life stories today about how real people are bringing peace, working for peace. I'm not going to put this in my weekly for you next week. I found it too late for this week. It's called the Beloved Project. And it's a group that's going to work online, providing a workshop coming up in January, reconnecting with our beloveds across political divides. If you've given up on talking politics with a loved one, but you don't want to give up on them, and you long to truly know and be known across your differences, then this workshop is for you. This is not the first time I've seen this. I've even seen this at the University of Michigan. There are people who are working in little clusters to develop ways for us to learn how to communicate across this cultural divide that is happening. And I'm going to recommend that for you to check out. It sounds like it's really worth our time to learn how to communicate in this day and age with each other again. Isaiah 11 goes on to say this: "They will not hurt or destroy on my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." Again, this sounds dreamlike, especially with what we're going through right now. I was at a family gathering a couple of months ago with a student's family for my daughter's school, and they were celebrating, kind of having a party. And there was a lot of people there from the family, the friends, and even some students from the university. And the mother from this family got up and was just welcoming people and sharing and thankful for this gathering. And she actually said something I've never heard before. She goes, there really is no diversity. All the times in my speaking and writing, I've always talked about, let's celebrate diversity. Let's celebrate, the different changes and cultural differences among us and learn to love each other, which I still think is true. What she was saying, though, is that sometimes that creates more of a divide when we say there is diversity. And she was trying to point to we're all human. And her husband, who runs a business both in India and here in Detroit, later on he was telling me, Adam, we got the same problems in India as we do here in Detroit. I can't keep my employees happy. I can't keep employees from leaving. I'm trying to do excellent quality care. He trains healthcare workers. He goes, I got the same problems there as I do here. Exactly the same ones. And I was like, wow, that is kind of a confirmation, sad but true. We're all human. Sometimes we forget that. So taking action is possible when we first accept everyone's human, that we're all in this together. The prophet Isaiah found himself speaking to a king, King Ahaz, who was beginning to think this is all about to fail. He was looking at the well and the water's running dry. He sees the invasion of countries coming their way, and he's basically saying, we're done for. It's over. And Isaiah stands up with this amazing utopian type of vision of God is coming. God will be with us. There will be enough food and water. There is enough food and water if we can only learn to share. God is trying to open our eyes so we're not living and reacting out of fear. Elizabeth Fry is a well-known person amongst the Quakers. She was 33 in the year 1813 when she began visiting the local female prison in London. What she saw was horrifying. Women awaiting trial for stealing apples were crammed into the same cell as women who had been convicted of murder. Women ate, defecated, and slept in the same confined area. If an inmate had children, they accompanied her to prison and lived in the same inhumane conditions, if you can believe that. The whole family was in there. Most people thought this is just the way it is. Not Fry. She knew this was not the way it should be, and she began to go in to try to change this horrific prison system. Just one woman, a wife and mother, dedicated to helping those in need. Her eyes were open to the suffering. She began to write and come to the authorities looking for reform for the broken prison system. She said, I have come in peace. I am trying to make peace. I'm trying to help these people who are hurting and struggling. Yes, they've done wrong, but they don't deserve this filthy atmosphere. So she really risked herself, especially in the 1800s, going at this. She advocated for many of the reforms that are currently in our own prisons here in America. She was a visionary, one person who made a difference, fueled by her faith in the one true God who values justice and mercy for all. So at the end of the day, Isaiah 11 allows us to begin to dream and to have a vision of what we're working for. If you look at when the time of Christ, as he went around doing his ministry, he was transforming people. People are in need of being transformed. This is how we find peace. It starts in our own hearts. We have to have a vision, though. We have to say, this is not working. How can we do this? Where are we going? Rabbi Jonathan Sacks tells a true story in a book about peacemaking. And you might be familiar with this. This happened back in the 1980s. British diplomat Victor Mishkan was attempting to negotiate a peace deal between Jordan and Israel at the time. Following the time-honored diplomatic tradition, he began by having them come over for a meal. King Hussein of Jordan and Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres to his home for dinner. The evening proceeded pleasantly enough. The meal concluded, and the gentleman got up to leave. Until Mishkan said, hold on a second, gentlemen. I need your help washing the dishes. He informed both men that their departure would have to wait. So suddenly the three of these diplomats, these men from different countries, were at the kitchen sink washing dishes together. This was his intention all along. To get together, to be human together, to see each other as human and not the other country, this other problem. His groundwork took years, but he believes it began that night in the kitchen at the sink doing dishes. The work was delayed a little bit, but in 1994 they signed a peace treaty. Mother Teresa said, if we have no peace, it's because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. We belong to each other. The season of Advent is an interesting time. It comes every year, and it comes upon us, and we decorate, and we go out and buy presents, and we have gatherings. But it doesn't bring just a quick overnight answer to what's happening in our lives. Isaiah the prophet speaks of this coming time, this coming reign of God, where people will get along. Well, even the animals will get along. We pray the Lord's Prayer in a few minutes during communion. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We've been given a vision to work for peace, to be peacemakers. It starts with our internal selves, being self-aware of when we get reactive, of when we want to defend our side and pick a side, when we demonize the other, when we create more enemies than friends. Owning that, confessing that. And we come to the face of Christ, born into this world of conflict, born into that Roman horrible empire. And he came making peace. It's a hard road, and it really is a supernatural endeavor. We really need God's help to be peacemakers. But my hope over the next few weeks is that we will do that in little ways here at Westside, which are really big ways, through our gift-giving tree, through our Delanis donations, through getting together next week to get to know one another here in this building, to have a meal together. It all starts in relationships, getting to know one another, crossing those divides, coming out of our isolated selves to make new friends, to listen to people's stories. If we really listen, our hearts will be expanded. We'll have more compassion for each other. As we think about Christmas Eve coming up, 7 o'clock service, folks are looking for a place to go. We're going to create some neat social media memes that you can share if you do that kind of thing, but just even spreading the word. If you think, and I'm just putting this out there, if you think that if we printed little invitations for you to leave in the break room where you work or to leave someplace around town, if that would help, let me know. Kit, our office manager, is very creative and can make those kind of things we could pass out to you to take. And you could anonymously just leave those in different places, inviting people to come here to find that Advent hope, that Advent peace. That is my prayer for the coming weeks. Amen.